why we keep trying to fight inside of a system that didn't care for us and was built off of our oppression and will continue to be sustained off of it. I don't know how much repair there is even possible. So it brings me into this longing to actually draw upon the wisdom of relationship with the earth and the more than human world for that prophetic insight on what else might be possible.
Hello and welcome. It has been lovely to hear from many of you this week on how our community co-created episode was experienced. And thank you to those who took part in our live event at the weekend with Bayo Akomolafe, Manish Jain and Charles Eisenstein, which was energizing, playful, inspiring and challenging. We will be creating more of these live events in the future. All these recordings and many other resources are available for Presence members. We would also like to welcome our newest team member, Annegret Afolderbach, who was actually our guest on episode 2, so you can go back and listen to her story where she shares the journey of her sustainable fashion brand Tulips and At the Heart of Luxury, where she designs and hosts transformative masterclasses, experiences, activations that cultivate human connection and cultural transformation. She's a cultural futurist and experienced designer, currently working on a water podcast in South Africa. Annegret is a dear friend and has witnessed the whole decade of The Future is Beautiful as a contributor to the book and podcast guest, as well as, of course, supporter and friend. We have collaborated many times over the years, and so it's a real pleasure that Annegret is joining Mary Chan and myself for this series. As an influential changemaker with wide-reaching vision for planet and people, she connects humankind and organizations to the unexpected, rooted in cultures, lifestyles, and nature. We're excited to share that this episode is the first in our series, Listening to Each Other, Listening to Earth, which is a collaboration with St. Ethelburgers and funded by the Calliopeia Foundation. For this collaboration, we will be hosting 8 podcasts and some live events. We give deep gratitude to both for making this possible. Listening to Each Other, Listening to Earth reaches for the place where spiritual ecology and climate justice meet. It explores the integration of spirituality with grounded action through the lives and leadership of people of color. St. Ethelburgers builds community resilience for times of ecological and social emergency. Their work is organized around 4 principles, which are put values into action, seek opportunity in crisis, build community across differences, and protect what is sacred. St. Ethelburgers have a whole selection of incredible events coming up, so do have a look at their website, www.stethelburgers.org/events to find out more. As many of these events are online, they're open to you anywhere in the world. This series began this week with our live event in conversation with Rabia Abdullah. We look forward to sharing the podcast from this shortly. On July the 4th, I will be hosting a workshop for this series, which feels so important given what has been stirred up in the collective recently. It's called The Art of Deep Listening, and it will be both an interactive and experimental session where you'll be invited to take a mini pilgrimage. This is what I wrote about it. In many ways, the power of our listening determines the quality of our life. How much do we actually listen with open hearts and minds? Do we allow for the wisdom that lives inside us, in each other, and in the earth to bloom into form? There is so much valuable information that we can tune into in the subtleties. Here we find so much of the wisdom that we need to embody so we can co-create a beautiful future. Deep listening is a modern art form that can take us into and beyond the human realms as we explore the interconnected web of our existence. In this workshop, we will explore the spaces of deep listening to ourselves, to each other, and to Earth. We will take time to center into soulful stillness and deeply listen to our inner worlds through meditation, mudra, and contemplation. We will connect to each other, sharing our reflections, practicing active and safe listening. We will take an hour to go on a solo micro-pilgrimage into the wild nature surrounding us to listen to the whispers of the earth. And don't worry if you live in an urban environment, you will be able to find just a small patch of wild to do this with. Throughout our time together, we will be weaving in and out of these threads of solitude, togetherness, and interconnectedness with Earth. To join, please register via the St. Ethelburger's website. Before I introduce our guests, I want to explain the term spiritual ecology, as I know that many of you are spiritual ecologists, but maybe haven't come across the term. It simply means that everything is sacred and interconnected. The main values that are central to the spiritual ecology worldview are reverence, interconnectedness, compassion, stewardship, and service. By bringing all these principles together, we can start to move towards a way of life that is in harmony with the earth as a living whole, a culture that cares for the soul as well as the soil. And now to introduce our guest, Brontë Velez, as we explore spiritual ecology, Black liberation, and prophetic attention. Brontë, who uses the pronouns they, thems, work, and rest, is guided by the call that Black wellness is the antithesis to state violence. This is a quote by Mark Anthony Johnson. As a black-latinx, transdisciplinary artist, designer, trickster, and wake worker, their eco-social art praxis lives at the intersections of Black feminist placemaking and prophetic community traditions, environmental justice, and death doulaship. They are currently moved and paused by the questions: how can we allow as much room for God to flow through and between us as possible? What affirms the God of and between us? What's in the way? What ways can Black feminist placemaking, rooted in commemorative justice, promote the memory of God, which is to say love and freedom between us? They relate to God as the moments of divine space-time that remind us we are not separate, the moments that re-belong us to the earth. They embody this commitment of attending to Black health, imagination, commemorative justice, and hospitizing systems of oppression through serving as creative director for Lead to Life Design Collective, educator for Ancestral Art Skills and Nature Connection School, Weaving Earth, and quotidian Black queer life-making, ever committed to humor and liberation, ever marked by grief at the distance made between us and all of life. Brontë is an alumnus of the Spiritual Ecology Fellowship in the US, hosted by the Calliopeia Foundation, which was a sibling program to the Spiritual Ecology program at St. Ethelburger's Center. Brontë has given talks and led workshops at St. Ethelburger's on deep adaptation, spiritual ecology, and Afrofuturism. In this episode, which we have named Ancestral Gifts That Soften the Edges, we explore the question: how do we embody a sense of connection and reciprocity with nature? Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I am absolutely delighted to be here today with you, Brontë. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm also so excited to be here.
Our first question is in relation to this theme that this particular episode is part of, which is listening to each other, listening to Earth. And I would love for you to share what that means to you and how that shows up in your own life.
Thank you. I'm listening. Well, I'll first give thanks for the birds, because I think they're right now my greatest teacher of rewilding my attention and my capacity for listening in the ways that they allow me to pause, and the ways that they ask me to notice the more than human world, and the ways they ask me to get out of my own story. And I'm thinking of my friend Taylor Elam, who's a Black somatics practitioner, who says that listening to others' stories softens the edges of our individual stories. And the way I feel like listening to the birds' stories each day soften the edges of what's happening in human world helps me widen to something that's bigger than me, and helps me come back to the human story with a lot more care and reverence, and another kind of attention, and an ecological attention that I think we've lost. Yeah, and I love listening to birds with people, and I love what happens to love between us when we're in that attention together as a shared practice. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I'm in my second night away from a treehouse that I just spent 11 weeks in. The birds were such a strong part of that experience, as you can imagine. The last 2 mornings, I've woken up slightly dazed and confused at the lack of those birds around me. Like we became part of each other during that time.
Yeah, I can notice when I'm in a place where they're absent, where they're being interrupted, or where they feel like they can't, where they're not as present, either from sound pollution or from other just interactions that that block them from fully getting to come through. So I feel you. And you're back in the city now.
I'm in a town, a big town, in a very like urban, housing area, which was quite different to living in a treehouse on some private land by a lake.
That sounds so nice.
It was an experience where I felt like being in this pandemic time of stillness, and then being with not many humans around, but in this landscape, and literally living in a wooden structure that had a tree going through it.
Wow.
I felt such deep connection and support, and this sense of our interconnectedness in a way that it's now in my body, programmed differently to how it was before taking that length of time.
I think a lot about aesthetic and place, what physical spaces allow us to feel closer to the earth, the ways that design promotes anesthesia, takes away our senses. A lot of urban design, or like the way cities are designed, or domestic spaces or hospital spaces, the ways that we're interrupted from being able to connect with one another and with the land. Like it promotes these kind of enclosures or these trapped feelings that feel carceral to me. So I love imagining you in that treehouse in that intimacy, like in what it is to dream in a place like that and to create in a place like that and to pray in a place like that, how it changes our nervous systems and builds capacity for our imaginations and our healing. And I think a lot about how much am I able to really do and how much more work and labor it takes to heal when that relationship is occupied by anesthetic design. How much more practices you have to be able to get in touch when you can't see the stars in a place. Like how could you be in a prophetic practice if you can't even, how much harder it is to do that when you can't even connect with the stars, or you can't hear the birds, or you can't feel the earth. Like, whew, I'm really going to have trouble. I've been out during the pandemic, not in Oakland where I usually live. I've been out in the country. Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I really don't know if I could go back to the city after this. And I feel this obligation to city space, especially where, yeah, most Black and brown people are, and feeling my commitment to caring for Black livability and connection to nature and making that available in cities. And I also feel my own reckoning with not being able to go back and knowing how much it really impacts my nervous system.
I hear you, and I can relate so much to everything that you just said. Like being there with the stars during this time was so powerful, and being in a space where I was safe and I was sleeping like in this little loft, like in the top of the treehouse, and there were no curtains. So I was like in, whatever light was there, and I could see sometimes the stars and the moon through the window. And I often had this experience sometimes late at night, like I'd get into bed and I'd lie down and my body wouldn't want to sleep. And I recognized that what my body was saying was go outside. And so I'd go out and I'd walk under the stars, or I'd walk under the moon. I'd sit there, I'd sit on the cold grass. I would sing songs, mantras, and be in this like very beautiful reciprocal prayer that was ongoing and private. And it was so beautiful. And then of course I had the other experiences of, on the days that I went to the supermarket, being looked at because there are not many people of color in these rural areas in the UK. And I was like, oh, it's this again. I forgot about this. I've been in like deep communion with the earth, and I just like forgot that I was in like a town that was kind of like actually the town that I grew up in, where there weren't people of color around. I can really relate to that call to be back in the city, to be in a place, especially now with everything that's moving, where everyone's there, and you have that richness of different people and the anonymity of not being kind of obviously different as you walk down the street, but then the price that we pay for not being able to see the stars.
Yeah, it's so beautiful and upsetting, that the dissonance that has to happen to be able to safely experience wild space as a person of color and as a femme person of color. I often feel my fantasy of being That's probably colonial of being able to be this like tromping around in the land and getting to engage freely with land. It's not only colonial, it also feels ancestral, but that feels like I want that to happen in community, and it doesn't need to happen where the ways I receive it now is an isolated experience in these retreated experiences. And I'm recalling a time when I had gone to a gathering called Women of Color in the Wilderness, and then I went to visit my friend's land. I woke up longing to write poetry to the earth. I remember this really distinct voice that was like from the earth, where it was just like, I need you to build actual relationship with me. We're not about to do this extractive thing where you come out here, you write poems on this like white transcendentalist thing. I need you to be I want deeper relationship. I want this to be an experience that's not just about you and me, but about bringing more of my children of color to be with me, which is always the thing that I'm reckoning with, that it's not that I can't have an isolated experience. And I notice when I do, I don't feel safe. I've had experiences recently of one with after this brother Ahmaud Arbery, who black man who was killed in Georgia while he was running. There were campaigns after to like honor him by running with him the length of the miles he ran. I remember feeling like I'm I'm not gonna run out here in this town that doesn't have black people in it. Like, why would I go run when I just heard this experience and feeling the wake of that trauma and my longing to isolate. And then similarly, recently, same out here, my partner brought me to meet the Meadowlark song they're singing right now. And so we drove to this meadow and pulled off to a little part of the road. And I was so excited because I had never heard them sing, and it was so electric and beautiful. There was a moment where he went to go lay down in the truck bed, and I was the only one sitting up. And we're on the side of the road, and I thought I was hearing wind, but I realized it was a car that was coming, and I had my binoculars up trying to look at them, trying to look at the meadowlark on a phone line and I remember immediately thinking the optics of this look bizarre. Just like why would a black woman be in this truck with something black in their hand? Like, with just what in people's mind would connect that with I'm someone who's watching birds right now. And just this assumption that it would read differently because it's not something that we see. And putting my binoculars down because I thought it might read like something different, and that it might look, for some reason, this really peaceful prayerful moment could be criminalized. Yeah, I'm just like, what is it going to take? What is it going to take for us to be able to bring people out safely into wild spaces where that's not read in that way? And 10 days after that, this black birder in New York, Christian Cooper, he's having the police called on him because he asked a woman to bring her dog onto the leash in a place where he was trying to witness the birds. And yeah, that moment 10 days later affirming the fear that I had, because it's real, and feeling like I didn't know how to explain to my partner what I was feeling because I didn't it didn't feel logical, or it wasn't coming from a place where any of that was happening. It was just the assumption that people, yeah, don't see black people in wild space, or folks of color in wild space, and so then they think otherwise.
Mm.
Mhm.
Wow, when you're sharing that, I can feel it. My nervous system changes. It's really, yeah. It's like The closest thing I can relate it to that isn't about race is maybe how women feel when they have to walk somewhere at midnight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like there's anyone there in the streets, but it's like there could be. There's that quickening of the steps and the like, oh, wait, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely, yeah, it's both of those things. I feel sometimes the word intersectionality first emerged from a Black attorney, Kimberly Crenshaw, in the 90s when Anita Hill was in these hearings about Clarence Thomas had sexually assaulted her and verbally sexually assaulted her. What happened in the early 90s was that there were these two things happening that couldn't come together. That how could you as a Black person try and prevent this other Black person from getting on the Supreme Court? Like, why are you trying to block him? We need to support our people. So a lot of Black people came after her for trying to prevent a Black man from being successful. At the same time, there was this thing where she was a woman that had been assaulted and harmed by this man. These distinctions couldn't be held together, that she could be both Black and woman, and that was a distinct experience. And that's when Kimberly Crenshaw and their team, who were representing her, started to think about what that term intersectionality and what does it mean to be living at these multiple intersections and to be faced with those things at the same time. Because I definitely also feel when I go on to hikes or if I want to go somewhere by myself, I think about what it means to be femme or to be Black, or sometimes I'm not dressed feminine. And then I'm like, what if I'm read as masculine? Why didn't I dress feminine? But either way, that I feel in danger because I sometimes I'll dress feminine because people treat me kinder. I notice in this way of like being attracted to me, but that also puts me in danger. But I feel like I'm treated nicer. It's a different
It's a different
danger.
danger.
Yeah.
Because there's like a kind of helpless, like, let me help you kind of way. But then there's also like, oh, and now I'm helping you. You could help me. And
What can I get out of this experience? Just so creepy. Ugh. So yeah, it's deep. The dissonance, or what W.E.B. Du Bois calls double consciousness, where you're constantly thinking about both how you're being read, how you want to be read, and what is true in your spirit, like what you know to be true. How that dissonance really prevents me from being present in nature. I've been thinking a lot about, depending on the circumstances, if I'm isolated, I could feel what you're talking about in the treehouse, where I'm like, it takes me 2 days in a wild space and I feel my true spirit come back to me. I can just feel I'm so bubbly and buoyant and giddy and I'm laughing and I'm just so, my spirit is back. And then there will be something that racializes me or drops me back in. And it's usually that moment of going to the town, the market, where I'm like, oh my God, yeah, this is real different. Mm.
and so holding that reality in which we live, and yet at the same time, this understanding that for us to be embodied, that is in relationship with the earth, how do we find this sense of connection and reciprocity?
Yeah, a lot of my work explores the history of ways Black people have practiced fugitivity, practice living in ways that are outside of dominant systems of oppression and deciding I'm not going to try to repair. I'm not going to try to stay here inside of this and repair this. I adhere to a different relationship to my life, a different order. I'm not going to play games and be in agreement with this thing that is a hot mess and wants to kill me. I'm going to do something different. So I think a lot about what it means to, there's a Black spiritual called Still Away to Jesus. For me, it's not necessarily Christ, but just to still away to spirit. It's such a beautiful song. And yeah, what it is to like bring yourself on your own terms elsewhere, and elsewhere being the land, and deciding, yeah, I know that I'm looking out at an alder right now as I am saying this. In this line of redwoods, deciding that I know that we have a relationship and that I have to care for that relationship and I have to revere that relationship, and that the land wants me to be there and the land wants us to be there. So, and the land longs for our presence and our attention because their health is informed by our reverence and our care as well. So I've had to just decide, this is what I know to be true, and there are these systematized lies, come into trying to oppress that truth, that actively harm my ability to be present and Black people or folks of color's ability to be present. But that doesn't mean it has to determine how I experience my life. It doesn't have to fully determine it. So I love learning about ways that Black people ancestrally have decided things on their own terms for themselves and communed with the land for their freedom and for their liberation, and left slavery and created their own communities, created maroon communities, and lived off the land and did their own thing in their own systems of governance. And yeah, I'm always just like, why we keep trying to fight for these, myself included, fight inside of a system that didn't care for us and was built off of our oppression and will continue to be sustained off of it. I don't know how much repair there is even possible. So it brings me into this, it brings me into this longing to actually draw upon the wisdom of relationship with the earth and the more than human world for that prophetic insight on what else might be possible, to see how other beings are showing up for how they're living, or again, what can I learn from the bird world, or these other, how are other creatures doing their thing? How might we be informed by that?
If we acknowledge that the systems of oppression and the systemic racism and climate justice, like all of these things are intertwined in ways that I feel we're just touching the surface of unpicking. And we stand here in this moment where we're also in the biggest civil rights movement in the world that's happening right now. Where do you feel the opportunity is for a shift?
Thank you for that question. I recently held a practice with my partner Jordi Rosales, that was called Confiagua, Practices in Prophetic Listening. Confiagua is a word that I made up, mixing confiar and agua in Spanish, and it came from a workshop I held where we were making up new words, and a student said they wanted a word for no pressure to respond. Like when you send something and you don't really need somebody to respond, but you'd love if they did. It would be great. And I have been thinking about the word for a long time, and finally Confiagua came as a way to like trust in the water or trust in the flow. And then when we were trying to think about a title for our prophetic listening workshop, and Confiagua came as this way to just trust the flow of creator or God or spirit or divinity through us. And something that he said during the workshop really provoked me, which was about, he was talking about the difference between chronos and kairos, the difference between chronological time, and the way kairos is seen as like divine timing, or like a moment where time falls apart so that anything might be possible, or the moment where time opens so that God can come through or divinity can fully be hosted well. He said that kairos was not actually a quality of time, but a quality of attention. So I think about that at this moment of kairos, where our attention was different because we were all paused by COVID. Our attention together, our relationship to our attention has changed, perhaps in these past couple of moments where most of us were still at home when George Floyd was killed. We all were on Instagram, or we were all on the news, or we were all on our TVs. And so there was nothing else that could really distract us, because this is all of our attention was brought there. To me, there's something about the what Jody will call kairotic, that kairotic moment where something different might be possible, and where we were able to shift because our attention was different, and we couldn't say, we didn't have the same pace. People are not at work, and most people are not at work in the same way. We're not doing the same things. And so we had to really actually we're having to actually examine police brutality. We're having to really examine the evil history of the police state in the US, and the imperialism, the wake of imperialism of the US, and how that creation of race has harmed the planet. It is harming people, and it is harming the planet. And the military industrial complex, which is a part of the police state, is one of the greatest contributors to pollution across the world, the US military. So when I think about the ways that the US military and the police state are in cahoots, the way that exhaust and that toxic patriarchy and that desecration of life, that longing to control and possess from stories and dominant paradigms of greed and money and power, the way that has harmed us and harmed the land is so deep. Makes me, I always think about a quote from Toni Morrison where I think it's a speech she has, where she's saying, don't fight for racism because it's just a distraction.
Bam.
Exactly. Drop the mic. Toni Morrison's spirit just dropped the mic. Don't fight for racism. It's just a distraction. The real illness, it's just a symptom, she says, of a real illness. And the real illness is greed. And so they'll try to have you think that what you need to be fighting is racism. But racism is just a construct that was created to help absorb more power, absorb more money, take more land. It makes so much sense that it's coming up at this moment during COVID, where Black people and brown people and disabled people, immunocompromised people, elders have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. And the ways that a lot of death could have been prevented had care been at the center.
Yeah. The UN figure of how many additional people will have died of starvation is 135 million as a direct result of the lockdown measures. We can guess who those people are. Like we've seen the images, and Arundhati Roy has shared a lot about, all the servants leaving the cities in India and not having work and food and going back to their villages by foot, and so we know where the food didn't get like back down the chain because of the economic effects of these COVID measures. And so we'll never know like really how many lives were saved and how many lives were lost and which measures were necessary. Like often there can be then this kind of self-congratulatory, like, well, we've, got the numbers down to this, and it's not often showing like what the other side of that was. Here in the UK, I've seen tentative like immigration bills that are being passed, which are they're not being passed, but they're being kind of discussed within this government, which involve any low-skilled workers no longer having visas in the UK after we've just had this pandemic, where we've realized that it's mostly the low-skilled workers that have been the essential workers, and that they are also disproportionately Black, brown, immigrants. And so it's like there's this gaslighting. Like on one side, it's like, well, we wouldn't have been able to do this without, the people that have been delivering food and the nurses. And then on the other side, it's like, maybe we don't need them. And so I find it really interesting because our society is still like so built on these systems of oppression.
And yeah, and disposability, because it just makes me think about, yeah, that you don't have to practice caretaking if you read someone, a community, as disposable or non-essential, which is just wild to me. It's so, or I shouldn't say wild, it's so domestic. It's so domestic to me that that's how things are operating, when so much of this could have been preventative. Yeah, I'm very curious about how this moment will change us or not. I don't think it's our coming to glory moment. Predominantly, the systems at play will continue to do business as usual, and which is so sad when we've been offered this immense gift, even in its complexity of this pandemic, to really to demand something different to emerge, a real pause to be like, please look at yourself, look at what you've got going on, an invitation to move differently. And yeah, not feeling super personally, not feeling super trustful about, or even hopeful on a system scale about what is going to change. But in terms of like organizing and people power and the ways I've seen communities on their own terms show up to people outside of municipal aid, outside of support from the government, has been really energizing and has been really beautiful, and has given me a lot of hope. Yeah, definitely stabilized me during all of this.
Yeah, and the individuals that are, well, the people that are the humans that are questioning, the fact that most of the books in the top 10 of the bestsellers this week are on anti-racism and white supremacy. I'm curious to see like what happens, because
the reality is that this decolonization process of the mind, of the inner world, is tough no matter what color your skin is. And it is triggering and it is painful. It requires dedication. And so I'm curious to see if this turns into something that changes many of us as humans, or if these books get put back on the bookshelf next week and things continue into what's next.
Yeah, I'm curious what's gonna happen and how and what is the sustainability of this moment. I've never seen anything like this. And it's really interesting to see the way that like brands and businesses are putting out their statements. Or I saw a very funny meme that said it was satirizing these brands, saying Black Lives Matter or orgs. It was like the graphic said like, we're a brand, insert vague platitude about justice. Um we care about Black people as much as we care about money. So Black Lives Matter. There's this thing where I feel like Black culture has been so essential to capitalism and has determined the voice of brands, like the culture of brands, the aesthetic. Yeah, just so much of how people sell things, which reminds me of minstrel shows and minstrelsy, to utilize Black people as props without actually honoring them. And then this big moment of noticing the appropriation, how much people have profited off of Black culture, and then trying to make these statements or make these announcements really feel empty, when it's just like, how are you actually going to care for black life, and what does that really require, and what does that look like beyond saying it because it's popular right now? So you just have such an interesting moment where it's so interesting that this is popular language. And yeah, what is that? I'm curious what that will really look like in practice for folks. I feel really excited that these books, even though it's a long time coming, that these books are being read. And yeah, I pray that there's no turning back, in the same way that COVID has brought us into this, like, we literally cannot go back. COVID had me notice the ways I was touching the surface of all the things that I cared about, particularly about my relationship to showing up to my bioregion and caring for the land here and caring for the beings here. Noticing how I wasn't really about that life, that I have so many strongholds still on me about capitalism and just not really saying fully yes to that land devotion and that earth devotion. Still having my so many tendrils of these systems still being really entangled in them. Yeah, and being what you're saying, that decolonization beyond just white folks, but for all people is difficult. It's really difficult.
And do you feel like, having had this time during the quarantine, that these tendrils, like, that you have completed a process there, or does it feel more like what you didn't have time to see has like risen up into view?
Yeah, I feel like it's been the latter, because I thought I was like really in it and doing these things that were a good life, that cared for the earth. And it's different than most, but yeah, it just brought to my attention, especially like being in domestic space, the ways I'm still so entangled with, predominantly it feels like my relationship to love and the domestic. am playing house in the domestic, and kind of my socializations as a woman, these stories of what that needs to look like, and a lot of things actually about love and sexuality that have come up during this time that feels so, actually, that from where we locate ourselves in love and sexuality, the ways that informs our longing, our desire, and then it also informs, our beingness. Like, it feels deeply connected and related for me. So I've noticed a lot of how I've had this weird time during this moment of like wanting to perform domesticity. I saw this very funny meme that said, like, at the beginning of the quarantine, we were all learning how to make banana bread, and now we're learning how to abolish the police by the end. And I've been feeling both the beauty of homemaking and feeling concerned about having been isolated with my partner and not being connected with, not being witnessed in community, not being challenged, not being able to be witnessed in community, connected to a wider web. The ways that a lot of my work moved online, that was going to be in community, that would change who I asked to meet my needs, and the way that I'm going back to these stories around love and getting needs met that are privatized again. Yeah, I just thought I had done so much work around that, and I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of work here to do about love and redistributing needs to a larger community, and being witness a larger community, and being willing to be transparent with more than just, a partner about hurting or sadness or the depression that's come up during this time. That's definitely been present. Yeah, the work around love.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the Global Patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members, and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation.
I have been lucky during this time in that I host an online community space that is permanent. Like, it didn't just pop up for this time. It was designed as a way of bringing a global community that are part of these conversations into a space of care and practice. So in this community, which is called Presence, we have been having a lot of extra calls a friend called it the Corona coaster that we've all been riding. I have had like days of feeling like so ecstatically connected to the divine. I have had like days where I just have cried for 3 days nonstop, trauma tears. I've had nightmares and I've had insomnia and I've had creative sparks of energy. And what I found really interesting, having this global online community space to hold, and the way that I hold space is also by sharing my own experience. Like, we're in this together, and these are the tools that I'm using, and this is what I'm experiencing, and what and here's space for you to share too, and a real invitation to share the lows as well as the highs. And what I found really interesting is that a lot of them have coincided. People have been having insomnia at the same time and feeling really creative and alive at the same time, and feeling deep sadness at the same time. And so that's been really interesting for me. And I really wish that we had a collective dream journal during this time.
Yeah, I had actually woke up one morning and was thinking I really would love to hear about people's dreams during this time, because it felt like there's a lot to be learned from this moment. And I held a dream harvest, called it a dream star, which is a practice I received from the Weaving Earth community, with some friends that I met during the quarantine. Actually, like, we all have one mutual friend, Athil, who convened us as femme folks or just friends in her life. And then we ended up, without having a shared practice or knowing, except for this mutual friend, it ended up being this really amazing community circle that was convening, that first happened around our menstruation, and just having a sacred relationship to our moon time during this time. And then that transition to creating sacred space for honoring transitions throughout the day, the way that every day feels like the same thing, but it also feels irregular. And so we started to bring in an essential oil or bring in a scent that helps us just mark thresholds. And then that brought us into caring for our dreams more intentionally. And I held this dream star where basically we woke up at 4 a.m. We had our eyes closed. We just shared our dream as though it was happening in the present, and shared where we were. We just found all of these threads. And then by that time, I was up for the dawn chorus with the birds. And it was just such a phenomenal day to begin with a community that leads by their dreams. And then I was like, is anyone doing a dream journal right now? A collective dream journal? And Dave Haig from Weaving Earth, one of the co-founders, he said actually someone in San Rafael in California just started a website called I Dream of COVID. So there's this way to populate like what our dreams are about. Because I started to have a lot of dreams that were about social distancing or just social anxiety, or people in public space. Like, we were coming back together for the first time and people were touching me or too close, or there weren't protocols. And for the first time, I started to see screens in my dreams, which I hadn't interacted with screens or scrolling before. And for the first time, I'm on FaceTime in dreams, and it's different. It still feels like there's something protected there. But yeah, that was really upsetting for me and bizarre to start to see the introduction of screen to that space.
Wow. I don't think I've had a dream where social distancing or screens have come in, which I'm grateful for at this stage. But I've had, interestingly, especially actually towards the beginning of the lockdown, I had race-related dreams and racial violence dreams. I was talking to my brother about this, and he shared some of the dreams that he'd been having, then had a conversation like something big is going to happen around race. And then I was like thinking then we started to have that conversation. I would love to hear more people's dreams. And we had that, like, let's start a thing. And then I was like, whoa, no, I meant to be like writing a book. Like, I don't need to take that on. So I remembered not to take that on. But
good wisdom.
yeah, which is part of my practice now of remembering that not every bit of inspiration needs to be acted upon. And in a way, that's also a process of decolonization, right? The inspiration can be there, but it doesn't need to be manifested.
Yeah, manifested.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel that. I'm in that deep wisdom too, because doing the absolute most. And who I call my bishop or my pastor, Trisha Hersey, who's a theologian that looks at the exegesis or scriptural references of Jesus as a restful being. She looks at the theology of rest and runs something called the NAP ministry.
Yeah, I love the NAP ministry.
Trisha has really taught me just the way that we can't. I talk about rest so much, or I talk about decolonization so much. What ways am I really practicing that in my life for real, for real? And just learning boundaries during this time has been so important in saying, yeah, I have to abstain from the screen because I'm exhausted and I'm feeling digital fatigue. I need to connect with the earth. I've got to get my feet on the ground. I have to sit with the birds today. And it was beautiful when we were doing that dream work as a group to actually practice, like, our sleep, our rest was a part of our work, and our dreams were a part of our work. And I can read this. There's a mantra that came to me to say over my dreams before I went to bed, because I started to also have nightmares. I noticed that time before sleeping was not, I wasn't being careful before I was going to bed. It's called Por los Sueños. As I shapeshift between realms, I thank this day, both its beauty and its cracks. I trust there was God between those moments. I forgive the day. I forgive myself for moments where I was not in integrity with love. I'll try my best to show up in deeper integrity tomorrow with the practices that can support integrity. As I slip into rest, I ask for protection over my dreamscape. I ask to be nurtured and supported on my journey toward other realms. I ask for tender dreams, clear, generous insight, and sacred memory. I give reverence and compassion to all I encounter today. May they also rest softly. When I wake, may I remember to bless and thank the water and celebrate the gift of being alive. May I remember that water can serve as the union between my body and spirit and across realms. May I remember the earth needs my dreams. May it be so. There's an exclamation point. I love that of really honoring that time.
Powerful words, Brontë.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, caring for that time and speaking that over myself. I haven't done that in a minute, so this is reminding me to come back to that.
And I loved how intertwined with the earth that prayer was.
Mm-hmm. It makes me sad that we don't. Yeah, that we don't. We've predominantly lost traditions to do dream work together and to be in prophetic practices together, and like you and your brother having those visions, and what would it look like if we were really synergizing and committed to that kind of that dream work as central to our way of being, to our cosmology, because it's so special.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my teachers and friends, a yoga teacher, Uma Dinsmore, she invited me around the winter solstice to go to her house for a dream over. And I didn't go in the end because it was a bit of a journey. We were going to make a tea with a herb from the land, local, and then sleep with our heads together and do a prayer and then share our dreams in the morning. And I have wanted to create that space. Yeah, for years, actually. I really wanted to plan one of these in the last kind of community house that I lived in. It's never happened. I wonder what would come of us as humanity if we brought the dream space back as a community practice.
Whew. I think it's way too many answers in there.
Can we handle them?
I'm like, I just feel like that would be so liberating. I'm in a class right now called Dark Matters. The title is from Black scholar Simone Brown's book. It's called Dark Matters on the Surveillance of Blackness. And the class is about the intersections of technology and anti-Blackness and surveillance and policing, and the ways data, though it seems neutral, is actually deeply racialized, removes accountability, though it's encoded with our systems and reflects our systems, or even does more harm. For class last week, we had to get into a group project, which I was like, please, I do not like group projects. It just brought up so much. Too much stuff, because I was like, I know these boys are not going to do as much work as me. And I always love doing the most. Yeah, but we had to think about what would computer technology look like based on our values. What would we create? And it could be speculative, or it could be specific about the interface. How would the interface be different? Would it just be this flat screen and a keyboard? And like right now, the way I'm looking at you with these two planes, dimensionalities, the way that was informed by someone to think in this way, or this flat keyboard, or the way that the sound comes through, any of those things, how might it look differently based on your values? And this story came where I just really, well, I'll share my beginning because it's short, around thinking about, because it's about dreams and the computer. It's a speculative fiction. It's the day where the sun gets swept up by darkness, where black spills across the sky like jazz turned the world upside down. Like trumpets shook rain from the ground and down came soil. We ain't on them old calendars no more. We move on ecological rhythms again. We've been waiting for the eclipse to honor and remember that day we finally stole away into our own kind of refuge. When we lost the words for police and white and nigga. When enough composted them into longing for a new language. I light a candle in the morning and give thanks. Each biological and chosen family across the town starts stomping and singing into the accordion-like floors of our homes. We are resourcing the town's energy through our offering of grief and praise today. We shake and call out to release the remnants of ancestral trauma that still got a stronghold on us in our bones and in our blood. These piezoelectric floors start harvesting our release and transmuting it into energy. Someone able-bodied from each family got to bring their conduit disc to the center today, charged by our prayer as an offering. And we got to come as stewards of our family's dreams to the dream keeper, so the prophecies can emerge to guide us until the next eclipse. It's my turn to go. I bring our conduit disc of obsidian, round and engraved with symbols that tell the story of our family to the town's hive. In my bag, I bring offerings for the spiders, for the bees, for the birds, for the stars, for the mountains, for the steel, for the glass, for the silica sand, for the iron ore, for the gold, for the bauxite, the hafnium, the tantalum, the palladium, the copper, the boron, the cobalt, the tungsten, the aluminum, the zinc, the nickel. I practice recounting the dreams my family shared with me at the fire this morning till sunrise, chanting them to myself over and over again. I get to that hive where the altar to the elements that make up our collective computer lie. Folks weave in from across the town as representatives of their families, and we each lay down our offerings and give reverence to the elements that allow us to communicate and mesh with the other sites of refuge that emerge from the revolution. We each pour out water onto our offerings to account for our grief, for the way these materials were mined in the past. We offer our thanks for their magic. We each place our conduit disc into their respective places and turn them into the ground beneath us. If each family gave their offering of grief and praise this morning, then it will be enough to charge the computer. Some people are more resourced than others and have brought more than one disc for folks who still have trouble dancing, singing, and moving grief for their families. Suddenly, as all of our discs whine into the ground, a bell-like vibration rings out and our bodies hum all over. In a circle, we gravitate towards the hum and place our mouths against the sonoluminescent cone-like mics. We will whisper our family's dreams from the night prior into the cones, and the sounds will transfer into light before us, our dreams colliding and drawing into one another. We grab hands and witness the dance of holographic light before us in awe. We thank the stars for their wisdom and wait for the patterns to be revealed and announced back to us. We wait.
Whoosh. Thank you.
Yeah, so deep. And the way that the other folks, the two other men in my group, they are coders, and the way that they continued the story was really profound. We opened thinking about mesh networks and community-owned Wi-Fi, community-owned service, and what that would look like in future sites of refuge, and kind of like, how could we be on our own servers or have community-owned technology? And that brought up this vision of a computer that wasn't privatized or individualized, but rather a public place that is reverent for the matter, that reveres what it is for me and you to be talking right now, which I just want to give thanks for all of those elements that allow us to speak through space and time so quickly. It's truly magical. The way that they continue the story, it goes into one brother, Timur. He brought the story into a rite of passage with children in a town nearby. And then the story closed from this brother Paras, who these kids are at the top of a hill. They see these different communities this night, on this evening, with their different holographic lights all over. And they're all in this prophetic dream practice at the same time in different parts of this town. And they can tell that one community is not well because their light is faint from the town. And so the children are gonna tell the elders in the morning that we need to go visit them because they're not well. And I loved this idea of like being able to see that that community is not dreaming. So how do we go care for them? And I can't stop thinking about that.
It's the place where technology and spiritual ecology come together.
Yeah.
It's like, what is the role of technology in spiritual ecology?
Yeah. I think about that a lot because a couple of years ago, I was truly on a way to being I was almost on the verge of becoming a cyborg. And I'm embarrassed about it, but also I think it's an important part of my trajectory because I wanted to be there's this group called the Cyborg Institute that my friend Harry Pickering and I were really drawn to as designers. And I was drawn to the way that they were bridging their bodies with tech and feeling like robotics and tech are dominated by white men, and the military often appropriates these technologies that are made for divination or for magic. And there's a woman, Moon Ribis, who is considered a cyborg. She has basically a chip in her body that's a seismograph, so she can feel earthquakes, and she can feel that the earth is quaking even if she's not near the earthquake. And I wanted something like this with the moon. I remember when I first met Will Scott, who's been on the podcast, he was like, well, why do you need a chip in your body to the moon? And he was saying he was a Luddite. And I was like, you're so right. Why do I think I need a chip to connect to the moon, And it's so funny now to be in such a different, I would never think of doing something like that now, but in ways that technology was about ritual technologies, or prayer as a technology, or any of these things that help us connect with the divine, that I think it was my absence of ways to deeply connect ecstatically to the land that I just longed for. I didn't know the ways to be able to feel or do that on my own. And so that felt like the medium to be able to do that. And now as I still approach the matter of things through the work that I do with the work that we do at Led to Life with transforming guns, or thinking about I do think a lot about matter. Writing that story helped me to think more about like, what would tech look like if it was related to our prayer, or related to our reverence, and related to our care for the earth. Because I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I'm curious, in the aftermath, what does it look like what does it look like when it's not built on extraction? I just can't even, researching how many elements are in my computer, I was just like, oh my God, it's amazing. It's amazing. And I don't think that we have that spiritual connection.
If our way of connecting to each other becomes more and more through technology, if we know that many of the materials that are in our computers get there through modern day slavery, then the complexity of how we untangle these systems of oppression.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to finish that sentence, but it's like, it just gets more tangled, because with the movement that's happening now, a lot of the conversation is about how these systems of oppression are affecting people now that are technically free. And we haven't even brought in to this current conversation about Black Lives Matters the people that are currently in modern slavery.
Exactly. For me, it's about American exceptionalism. Yeah, I think a lot about the ways I am entangled with American exceptionalism and the bubble of America. Yeah, the ways that story is so centered, and the ways that the reverberations of American empire is not touched into. The ways that America has outsourced the visibility of our products or labor, just like we're not touching into the labor. We were talking about something in this dark matters class about how the computer interface now, our new computers, the software hides all of the processes that are happening. So we go and, I click leave from the Zoom call, and I don't see all that happens from that. It's to make us feel like we're having the user experience. It's so that the user experience feels cleaner or feels quicker. But the new design for our technology, like, prevents us from being able to experience the time, and mostly, like, the time that things take, or the supply chain that things have required to get to us. And I just think about that a lot around what it is to hide these processes, where you could check out on Amazon and you don't have to be paused to see all that took. I've heard about an artist that did a VR experience where you're checking out and you have to actually go through the supply chain, where you actually are paused and you're taken through all of what it takes for this product to get to you. I think that restoring that intimacy would strengthen our movements toward liberation, because I don't understand the dissonance of organizing via our cell phones and computers and not holding the destruction that has required. We just looked at a text called The Land Before Silicon Valley, and this connection that the authors are making between the gold rush and Silicon Valley. Yeah, I can't help but think about how much has been, who right now is mining coltan, who is in mining and they're in this forced thing of having to pay for their licenses to be able to, their mining licenses. Or in this book I'm reading, In the Aura of a Whole, it's about sites of material extraction, diamond miners being x-rayed every day to make sure there's no naked Black men, naked, being x-rayed to make sure there's no diamonds in their bodies. Like that kind of stuff is happening. So I'm just even feeling right now that I used to have a practice that I learned from my friend Taylor to smudge the computer. I remember I was with her once and she just smudged her computer before she got on. And I remember that I had a practice where I wanted to presence what it took for this computer to get to me. And I haven't done it in a while, but it's just like what it really takes. I stopped doing it because every time I would feel it, I'd be like, damn, I'm not going to be able to do my damn work. This is not okay.
Yeah. I have a ritual of connecting my computer actually to the earth and to the cosmos. Yeah, like grounding the energy of the computer and turning it into a sacred space, because a lot of the work that I'm doing on it is in that realm. And I guess I don't want to get distracted by all of the other things that the internet opens up to. But it's interesting because having rituals around how I treat my food, or having rituals, or having a lot of thought into where my clothes come from. And I never thought about honoring the process fully in a ritual of where my computer and my phone came from, even though of course I know like what's happening with the coltan and the Congo, and yet how intimate I am with these objects, because they're my gateway to humans, to the world, to life outside of what's become a smaller a smaller bubble during this time.
I love that practice of grounding the computer between the earth and the cosmos. That's what it is, which is so phenomenal. And I've been curious for a while about like what, even when I was imagining that story of just like, what would it be to see an altar of these elements, to really imagine them. You know, I love piles of things. I like to see like piles of rocks, or I'm just like, oh, look at that pile. But just imagining an altar of those elements was so helpful to just, and to feel the way that it, even though the interface abstracts it from the earth. So we're looking at these silver, metallic and plastic objects that don't feel like matter. Yeah, what is it to retrace them? I love that vision of grounding. And yeah, so much spiritual work I'm doing on the computer as well. So it's really beautiful to imagine like really being with the complexity and the complicity.
I love that vision of an altar, of all of the components and the labor. It's, yeah, quite something. Can you share a little bit around your journey with Led to Life and how this concept of taking guns and turning them into shovels came?
I was working as a copy editor for a retrospective of Mexican artist Pedro Reyes's work. Was working for a publisher that was trying to introduce more Latin American artists into the art canon. And I just had this job of being the last reader on texts before they went to the publisher, fact checking, making sure there's no errors. Got to spend time with his text and his body of work. And he had a piece called Balas por Pistolas that is turning guns into shovels and planting trees. And he made, I want to say, 1,527 shovels. And the way that he did it was they took like a steamroller. They put out a call for guns with coupons, a gun buyback program for people to buy electronics or home appliances. They got all of these weapons, a lot of military grade weapons. They crushed them with a steamroller, and then they brought that metal to a foundry and they made the shovels, and then they planted those trees. I was really curious about, in my senior thesis at the time in undergrad, I was curious about fictionalizing a future where I was working with Pedro, using those shovels with artists and ecologists who were holding ceremony in the wake of disaster and responding to disaster capitalism and a climate collapse future. So it was 8 years into the Trump administration. So hopefully that's not true. But so far, those prophecies have been from the story have been happening. But I'm working with this collective of artists and ecologists, and we're working with these shovels. We're planting these trees, these urn trees for people who've been lost to police brutality after a hurricane that happens in the southeastern coast of the United States. A little girl comes up to me in the story, and she has this box made of bones. And in it is a book that we learned that was a story that was written in the 18th century that has been preserved by an enslaved Black Cherokee woman who held basically a metaphysical or spiritual rebellion at this site with enslaved folks, and that their visions for what they wanted to incite couldn't happen in the physical. They had to happen at a spiritual level. And they knew that it would instigate geographically the conditions for some other revolution to happen over time. And so it's this story, it's a prophecy for them about what they're going to do once they find this book, which comes from the Buddhist tradition of termas and leaving prophecies for a tertan who has to wait for the prophecy to manifest, for the conditions to be right. And so it's this weird thing where I end up reverse engineering once I joined the Spiritual Ecology Fellowship, bringing, like, I had just come out of writing this story and just was like, okay, so this is what I was like, yeah, I just wrote this plantable. The book was physically also plantable, and I'm very interested in forms that the form embodies the content, and thinking about mediums that help people actually go into the theories in an embodied way. One of the things I brought up was that in my story, I was working with Pedro and we're making guns into shovels, and maybe I could actually bring some of that story into real life. And I had several other project visions. And another fellow, Kyle Lemley, who wanted to do community forestry in ceremony, who had been doing community forestry but wanted to do it in ceremony, just invited me to collaborate. We end up bridging our projects, and Led to Life emerged, and it's been like kind of catching up to what it wants to be. But yeah, now we're at this really honoring this lineage of swords to plowshares, prophecies, which is also a biblical scripture. There's a biblical scripture in Isaiah 2:4 in the Judeo-Christian traditions that they'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. The nation will not war against nation any longer. And there's now this whole swords to plowshares community of all of these people we're meeting who do this alchemy work. And for us, it's about using that medium of transforming the gun. We wanted to bring community members who had lost their children to police brutality and to intercommunal gun violence to actually be a part of that process in public, to be in that grieving in public, and to be in that public theology, and to connect with the land. Our ceremonies have been public with a live crucible. It's been Black mothers who have lost their sons who have brought those guns to the furnace to be transformed. And it's just been such a deep, an unbelievable practice, truly an unbelievable thing to witness. And then, the tree plantings for them to happen in ceremony and for us to attend to not only the trauma of people losing their kids now, but to account for what police brutality is rooted in, which is slavery and which is violence against the land and which is traumatizing the land so that our environments are impacted by the wake of separation. So we also want to, through healing that racial trauma, how do we also know that the trauma that's happened to Black people has also happened to the land? And so how do we repair, how do we find co-respite, with the land and know that the work that we're doing is also about spiritual trauma.
And how is this work, which is beautiful and it speaks to what many are experiencing in this moment as a protest in many ways, is a public showing of grief. It is a public ceremony of grief. I'm curious as to how during this time that you've had on pause and as this uprising has been growing in momentum, how that is influencing where Led to Life is going.
Yeah, I think that this moment has, sadly, it makes me think about how relevant Led to Life's work is. And I noticed how in the wake of so much trauma and so much grief that is stimulated by protests and by demanding change, that the spiritual aspects or the ceremonial aspects get lost. I'm learning how necessary allowing folks to be able to repair after giving their life force to demanding that their lives matter and that they should be cared for, which is an absurd thing to even have to do. And so knowing that people are going to be really fatigued after this and also really energized. And so just wanting to be able to support with aftercare is a big thing I've been thinking about. And I always think about something that a Black healer and elder in my life, Orland Bishop, when Led to Life, when we hosted a ceremony in honor of the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, I just didn't know that I was going through a rite of passage and or in an initiation, and I didn't feel like I had the support to actually be held to go into the work we were doing in a way that was held by elders and by a circle and by a community. Orland said, right in the moment where I'm feeling that I was actually in the Redwoods and feeling like I needed to talk to an elder, and Orland called me and he said, I told him, I don't know why I'm getting on the train. I was going on the train from Oakland to Memphis to be at the site where Dr. King was killed before going to our ceremonies in Atlanta. And he said, well, that's because I said, I wish I didn't have to go on the train. I want to walk. I would walk if I could. And he said, that's because you're not going to a place. You're going to a time. And that's why you're going on a pilgrimage. And he said, the act of marching was what they were doing with the act of marching during the civil rights movement. And now, he said, your astral body is already at the time that you're about to go to, and your physical body is now going to go meet that time that you know to be true. And that's why you have to go slowly. And then he said that's what they were doing with marching, where King and the accompanying folks who supported the Kingian nonviolence movement were seeing and anticipating a future in which Black liberation was possible, a time when Black liberation was possible. And the act of moving their bodies physically through space was a gesture to go meet that time. And so I feel that right now. I feel these people gathering and in that wisdom of walking to a time. I feel that I've been thinking a lot about the burning of sites and the ways that people do alchemy in their own regard without maybe I see the ways people are doing the same thing that we're doing. It's maybe not formalized, but people are tearing down Confederate statues. I wish they weren't throwing them into rivers, but I'm like, wow, people are like saying these monuments and systems of oppression have to go. And so I just feel excited to be able to build our capacity to hold that, not all of it, but some of it, and to deploy some of our practices and tactics to be able to actually go through the rituals that help us hold time in a different way. Because right now, it's been 2 or 3 weeks that we've been in protest. Things have been changing rapidly, but for me, a ceremony is a site where things can happen in another quality of time, at another reverence of time, and they can heal things across time. It can heal things and trauma across time to me. So I look forward to seeing how we are continuing to show up. We're working on a film right now that I think is going to be a lot of medicine for people to see after this moment that traces last year's ceremony where we melted guns into molds that were the stars above Oscar Grant the evening he was murdered 10 years prior. And it's going between these scenes of the ceremony happening in the city and then the ceremony happening in the wild. And Black women who have lost their children to police brutality are whipping guns with the plants of this land and rebuking them. And we're bringing the gun to the ocean to ask the gun to be transformed. And it's like the land is in fellowship with us in our prayers for alchemy between the water and the fire and the soil. It's deep. So I look forward to offering that project soon.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for this sacred time that we're spending together.
It's so deep. We really went into it all.
We did. It couldn't have gone another way, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there feels like there is so much more, and yet there feels like there's been enough.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for this conversation, and I look forward to listening back on how Spirit led us.
Yeah. Of what we managed to listen to, what we listened to.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
And can you share the best ways for people to connect with you?
You can visit Led to Life's website at leadtolife.org, leadtolife.org, to learn more about our practice or ways to get involved. You can follow us on Instagram at LEAD2life. You can visit weavingearth.org, who I also work for as a facilitator, and follow us on Instagram at weaving_earth, or follow me at Little Nows, Little NOWS on Instagram.
Brilliant. Thank you. And as a closing piece, can you educate our community on gender pronouns? Because I was only really introduced to the practice of putting gender pronouns in a biography when I interviewed Will Scott from Weaving Earth last year. I know you use the pronouns they, them, and I would love just for you to very briefly explain, because that practice has not got into culture everywhere yet.
Thank you. Yeah, so we all use different pronouns to describe our genders. So she, her is assigned to folks who identify as women. That could be trans women. That could be you were assigned female at birth. You could decide that you like to be called she, her, hers. Other pronouns, he, him, his, folks who identify as men or what's called masculine of center or manly folk or trans men could also identify as, maybe they use the terms he, him. I've seen people use everything across the board. He, we, she, why not? And I use they, them to describe folks who are either gender nonconforming or what is called non-binary. So folks who identify in a wider spectrum of gender, which vibes with me. So I use the pronouns they, them. It helps me feel expansive and bigger than she, even though she is big and beautiful. I know that from personally inside of myself, I feel different. So that's what the pronouns practice is, and always a good practice to ask people what their pronouns are, because we can read people as feminine or masculine, and they might actually feel differently in themselves, and it can bring up trauma for folks who don't pass as women or as men or don't look androgynous. So I've learned a lot from the queer community in terms of asking people what they like to be called. Since I've noticed we use pronouns so much to refer to people. And you could also use pronouns to refer to the land. I don't like to the land. I also use they, them to describe beings that I've met whose gender I do not know. And it's really helpful to get me into a more relational practice with them.
Beautiful. I project femininity onto the earth and all the beings that I meet.
It's so flamboyant. I've noticed that we do feminize. I had a feminine relationship to the earth, and I've really learned from my friends at Queer Nature the way the earth is very queer, and sometimes there are things that are very feminine or masculine about the earth. So learning a lot from that too.
Yeah, beautiful. I really take that invitation to open up that expansive space of gender and post-gender when I'm relating to the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so grateful for this time.
Me too.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?